Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the structure and scope of Grade 7 Modern World History. But listen, instead of just memorizing a boring timeline of dates, we're going to unpack what it actually means to investigate human history over a 39-week roadmap. We're talking about fascinating global civilizations, massive shifts in society, and the specific real-world analytical skills you'll need to make sense of it all. Let's get into it. Every great investigation needs a core mystery to solve, right? Well, ours is this. How did conflict and connection shape the modern world? This year, we're all going to act as historical detectives. We'll be examining how different societies interacted with each other, whether that was through peaceful trade, the exchange of brilliant ideas, or, of course, devastating wars. Those interactions literally built the reality that we wake up in every single morning. This essential question, that's going to be our primary compass for the entire course. Now, to make thousands of years of human history actually manageable, the course is built around a chronological 39-week roadmap. It's neatly divided into 3 distinct 13-week eras. We kick things off with Unit 1, focusing on the Middle Ages, just to establish the foundations of early global societies. From there, we transition right into Unit 2, A Changing World, which is completely packed with technological and philosophical revolutions. And finally, Unit 3 brings us into modern times, carrying the whole narrative right up to the contemporary world we live in today. So here is our quick agenda for this explainer. 1. Welcome to World History. 2. Unit 1, The Middle Ages. 3. Unit 2, A Changing World. 4. Unit 3, Modern Times. 5. The Historian's Toolkit, and 6. Connecting Past to Present. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1. Welcome to World History. Moving right along to Section 2, Unit 1, The Middle Ages. Our investigation into the Middle Ages is really driven by one central question. How did medieval societies organize power, belief, trade, and daily life? When we think of this era, it's super easy to default to, knights in shining armor. But the reality across the globe is incredibly rich and diverse. We're going to look at the actual nuts and bolts of how human beings structured their daily existence. Who held the authority? What belief systems guided them? And honestly, how did they just survive? The sheer global scope of this unit is absolutely massive. We aren't just looking at one tiny corner of the map. We'll explore medieval China, the highly diverse societies across Africa, Japan, Europe, and the Americas. And the main goal here is to compare these civilizations. Like, how was a medieval society in Japan similar to one in Europe? And how are they fundamentally different? We'll also analyze trade networks, which were basically the ancient highways that allowed technology, culture, and, sometimes disease to travel across entire continents. To effectively compare and contrast all these different societies, we need some foundational vocabulary. 2 essential concepts you'll hear a lot are feudal and imperial systems. Basically, these are the structures used by medieval societies to organize power, loyalty, and daily life. By anchoring these political concepts early on, we build a solid framework to evaluate who held power and exactly how they maintained it. Was it through localized social hierarchies, or was it through massive centralized empires? Which brings us to Section 3, Unit 2, A Changing World. Okay, so during this second unit, the world completely rewires itself. We're going to investigate a rapid sequence of massive transformations. We start with the Renaissance, which sparked a literal explosion of art and science. Then the Reformation, which fractured long-standing religious power structures. After that comes the Enlightenment, which birthed entirely new philosophies about human rights. And those radical ideas, they eventually fuel global revolutions, fundamentally changing how countries are governed. Finally, industrialization steps in and completely alters human labor, innovation, and our interaction with the planet itself. It's a wild ride. And that launches us into Section 4, Unit 3, Modern Times. This final unit deals with some of the most intense and consequential global conflicts in all of human history. We'll trace the rise of nationalism and imperialism and really examine how those forces directly ignited World War I and World War II. Then, from the fallout of those massive conflicts, the geopolitical chessboard of the Cold War emerges, which ultimately shapes the contemporary world. This is exactly where all the historical pieces come together to form the picture of the society we live in right now. Because this era is so deeply defined by its conflicts, understanding the underlying ideologies is absolutely vital. Nationalism and imperialism are the distinct forces driving nations to expand their power and assert their identity on the world stage. Once you grasp that intense drive for a nation to either prove its superiority or expand its borders, The whole cause and effect relationship behind the massive global wars of the 20th century becomes so much clearer.
All right, let's pivot a bit for Section 5, the historian's toolkit.
So there's actually a major shift in mindset required when you approach historical texts. Think about it. When you read a fiction novel, your focus naturally gravitates toward the plot, the characters, the setting, right? But reading history, that requires a rigorous, evidence-based approach. Your focus has to shift entirely to identifying evidence, checking for bias, and critically assessing the author's point of view. It's all about becoming an active participant and constantly questioning the text in front of you. To understand why this shift matters so much, let's look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress Reading Framework for 8th graders. It expects students to focus 45% of their reading on literary texts, while the majority, 55%, is informational text. As your education progresses into high school, college, and eventually the workforce, this ability to carefully parse and analyze complex informational text becomes a totally critical skill for success. Tackling these complex texts requires a clear, step-by-step method based on Common Core reading standards. First, you need to determine the central ideas and accurately summarize them. Second, you have to cite specific textual evidence to support any analysis or claim you make. Basically, if a historical argument is made, it must be proven with the text. And third, you critically assess the author's point of view or purpose. You've got to ask yourself, why was this document written and who is it actually meant for? Now it's time to take off the student hat and put on the judge's robe. A crucial skill you'll develop here is delineating and evaluating arguments and specific claims. When a historical source makes a claim, we do not just accept it blindly, no way. We ask, is the reasoning valid? Is the evidence relevant and sufficient? Testing the evidence and actively looking for inconsistencies, that is critical thinking in its absolute purest form. But analyzing history is really only half the process. Communicating those findings is just as important. The writing standards in this course focus on confidently presenting your historical case to the world. This means writing strong arguments backed by valid reasoning and drafting informative texts that convey complex ideas clearly. It's about producing writing tailored perfectly to your audience and consistently drawing concrete evidence from informational texts to support your research. Finally, Section 6, Connecting Past to Present. The ultimate goal, the big so what of this entire Grade 7 course, is to connect past events to current global issues. History is far, far more than just a list of dates to memorize. It's the indispensable lens for understanding today's headlines. Whether it's a trade dispute, a geopolitical conflict, or a human rights debate, the roots of these modern issues were planted way back during the Middle Ages, the changing world, and modern times. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. How are the conflicts and connections of the past actively shaping the world you live in right now? Armed with deep understanding of these historical eras and a freshly sharpened historian's toolkit, your roadmap is clear. By exploring these sources and applying these skills, the complex world we navigate every single day is suddenly going to make a lot more sense. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer and enjoy the journey ahead.